The Pope recently raised a warning about AI and the concentration of power. Silicon Valley investor David Stacks responded on the RN podcast with a different warning of his own. He thought if government regulates AI too broadly, safety can become censorship. Before we argue about who should regulate AI, we really should be asking what type of technology is AI actually is. Realistically, people are not using AI like normal search, social media, or even traditional software. And this is where the real problem all begins. The first example is the way you used to search versus how you used to think. So traditionally, if you were thinking about something you were interested in, you would think about it in your mind, thrash through what you really want to do, then you will finalize your thought and then type it into a search box or a Word document or write it down. So most of your thinking happened in your head, and the terminal state of that thinking only happened when you actually already decided to write something down. That is switching and flipping on its head in the age of AI. Secondly, when it comes to private questions and thinking partners, what's fundamentally different about AI is people now are thinking into machines. Let me explain. Prior to AI, it was cognitively heavy to actually write down everything you think. But today, with AI systems, not only can you record with audio what you think, the AI in the language model has the intelligence to understand what you think and quickly write it down and allow you to interact with it. That didn't exist prior to 2020, 2019, and it fundamentally changed the relationship of human beings and technology. What's fundamentally different today is when people use AI to think, their private thoughts now become stored company data. Let me explain what I mean by that. Today, when you use a language model, even if you're just talking about an ideal, it does not matter. That becomes company data, whether you use those thoughts or not. So a lot of people today use AI as a thinking and reflection partner. So they're putting things into systems that company have control of that you normally have not put into systems throughout human history. Even when you go to a therapist, they usually write down your information on a notepad. Sometimes they might put it in a Word document, but for the most part, there's HIPAA laws and there's professional laws limiting what they can do with that data, and they have a strong regulatory body on what they're allowed to do. In the age of AI, people are putting their fears, their trauma, their unfinished thoughts all into the AI. And whether you use that information or not, whether you walk away and never log into your language model or not, those companies have those thoughts in their database associated with your profile. Now, why does this matter? This matters because AI companies cannot be trusted to protect this data on their own because their business incentives push them to collect more data, to learn more, and monetize more. Now, why is this important? First of all, there's the profit motive. You have to understand how AI technology works. Essentially, what a language model does is it has access to large amounts of data. The more information it gets about you, the better the model and performance becomes. So their incentive is actually to get much data as possible for you. It's literally their competitive advantage. The more they know about you, the more they're able to get the AI to respond in ways that seem like it understands you. So they're incentivized to keep your data as long as you allow them to do so. So this ideal that essentially we should not regulate these AI companies because we want the government out of it is a mistake. You're probably not going to want to allow a company to regulate itself when all of its incentives are in line with getting the maximum amount of data from you as possible. Now, even though there's incentives for corporations, government regulation is also necessary, but government control over AI can also become censorship, surveillance, and political control. Let me explain why. Throughout most of human history, governments has used the auspices of safety to encroach themselves in your lives, to encroach themselves in your civil liberties. For instance, you have to have your car registered, right? You have to have insurance. Well, if you get in a crash and you get hurt, then that's your fault or that's your burden. But the government says in order to keep others safe, we need you to have insurance. This is the same risk that we have if the people go to the government and try to use the government to keep everybody else safe. If you let the AI companies make a regulatory body to manage AI, you have to understand they're going to use that as a foothold to use the argument of safety to try to control your speech. So we have to use the government to regulate AI, but we have to limit how much power we give the government, because the reality is if the government say, we don't want you speaking against Israel, we don't want you speaking against the president, we don't want you talking about foreign policies or things that we consider the enemy combatants. Well, with these new AI technologies, if you agree to let the government regulate these companies, one of their qualifications to do so is going to be, hey, we need to have oversight. We need to have access. And once you give the state access, you're essentially giving the state or the government the opportunity to spy on billions of people, realistically, because a lot of these companies go beyond just the government. So that is the challenge. It's really about a balance. You can't let the corporations regulate themselves, but you also need the government to regulate them, but you also don't want to give the government too much power. Well, they become the actual centralized power controlling, surveilling you, similar to what they claim China has. So we want to definitely avoid that. Another major issue when it comes to AI regulation, there's something called thought versus intent. Thinking something is not the same as intending to do it, but AI can turn a private thought into a record for someone else to use as intent on you later. This is a very, very important part of why we have to be careful, not only giving the corporations too much power to do what they want with your data, but we also have to be careful how much power we give the government over these corporations to have access to your data. Because here's the thing, the government loves to prosecute people once they become an enemy of the state. And so the problem is, let's say hypothetically you're using one of these language models and you're thinking through, hey, I don't like Donald Trump. Somebody needs to overthrow the government. We need to force these people out of office because I think this country needs a revolution. Well, if you end up becoming on their radar, they can subpoena these language model companies for access to your records on these language models. Now, here's where the problem comes in. What's the difference between a thought and real intent? If I'm using these language models as a reflection board, where normally I would think these things in my mind, normally I wouldn't write them down as so much detail, but with AI, you get the power to basically dump everything you think into these models and test all type of thought patterns. Well, now the government can subpoena you and have deep records of thoughts and create any narrative they want in court to lock you up. And so it can become a totalitarian system where millions of Americans are spilling out their guts, talking about their gripes, talking about what they hate. They may even mention that I'm so mad I want to kill my wife, right? But what's the difference between a thought and an intent? And so there's a very gray area that needs to be established in these language models now, that because what we used to think privately in our head is now being dumped into software systems that are sitting on servers that billion-dollar companies are controlling, that government may end up getting access to. And so that's a significant problem that has not been solved. We have freedom of speech, but do we have freedom of thought? The reason that this is going to become a freedom of thought issue is because millions of people are changing their fundamental behavior on even how they think. If you look at the trade-off, if you were to think about something that's important that you need to work through, it is less effective thinking about it only in your head when you can put it into a language model, call a web browser and tools, and compare and contrast across 100 or 1,000 data points. So if you look at this at scale and where things are going, laptops, cell phones, everything's going to have an audio input where you may not even be using a computer in the future. You may just say, hey, go to online and buy me something. Almost everything you think all of your intentions, all of your actions, all of your executions will basically be put into language models, and that information will be stored on servers everywhere, which means that we're going to be giving these companies into these language models more information than we've ever had in human history. But here's the thing. Just like you have the freedom of speech, you have the right to say whatever you want, you should have the right to the freedom of thought. But here's where the problem comes in. Your thoughts can be used against you. Now that everything you think is no longer in your head and is actually written down, stored in a database, if you ever get on the wrong side of the law, they can subpoena that information and build an entire case against you. And there's no structural protections in our laws for this new paradigm. And this is something that needs to be dealt with.